There's so much conversation right now about summer school and using summer school to, quote, address the learning loss. Now, I'm a little concerned about this. You and I have talked a lot about this learning loss narrative, the COVID slide, the gap year. We really don't have evidence that the ninth graders are suddenly reading like fourth graders. It wasn't like their learning went away. There is some evidence, and there's some realization that there's unfinished learning and that there's unrealized potential. And one of the solutions being proposed right now is let's use summer school to catch everybody up. Let's level everybody up with summer school. And it's logical. It seems to make sense. More days for instruction. Now, we do recognize that a lot of teachers are tired and a lot of teachers have worked really, really hard this year. But summer school would seem to be like this major potential for addressing the things that occurred, especially for some of the students who were not able to engage in learning for whatever reasons. But when I look at the effect size research, John Hattie's block of research, summer school doesn't seem to be a worthwhile investment. There's like 300 things on the list. Summer school's pretty low. And so we have limited amount of money. Are we sure we want to spend it on summer school? Now before you get worried and criticize, we're going to talk about why the effect sizes are so low and what we could do about it. But before we do that, tell us a little bit more about effect sizes.
Effect sizes are a statistical tool that's used to be able to explain the magnitude of an influence. And as you noted, there are hundreds of influences that have been identified and their effects on student learning. Those influences that fall into that blue zone of desired effects, those are those influences that have the potential to really be able to speed up learning, to accelerate the learning that's happening. On the other hand, there are other influences that fall over in that developmental effects, that yellow area, summer school being one of them. And what that means essentially is that there's kind of a neutral effect that's going on. What we want to talk about is how it is that we can perhaps recast summer school to really be able to capitalize on those influences that accelerate student learning.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. So I'm sure there are individual studies that show here's a summer school program that was effective. But in the meta-analyses of summer school with data that is looking at learning outcomes, doesn't seem very powerful. And as I've been reviewing them and reading them and thinking about them, it appears that one of the challenges for summer school is that students perceive it to be punishment, that they failed in some way, and that it's remedial in nature. And when I say remedial, what I mean is we slow things down, we focus on isolated skills, we go really slow, we stay focused on that one skill until they, quote, master it. And so students find it boring. And they perceive that all my friends are doing other things, and here I am being in trouble because I had to be stuck in summer school. And so when we start thinking about that, how can we change that to get a really good effect? So we have some ideas. And the first one we need to start with is building student agency. How do we ensure that students recognize their successes and they recognize that when they put forth effort, good things happen?
Well, and that's really the focus of Module 3 in particular in the Rebound book, is especially rebuilding student agency. One of the phenomenon that seemed to emerge not only in summer school, but across this year for kids that have not been making that expected progress is that there's a feeling of defeat. I can't do this. I have lost my confidence in being able to do this. And so really job one, I think, is in rebuilding students' sense of agency. And by that, what I mean is that they understand that they can take action upon the world, that their efforts make a difference in what it is that they're learning. And for lots of kids, those kids that we are especially concerned about, that are at risk, that are vulnerable in one way or another, they have perhaps lost that sense of agency, and they're not quite sure anymore how to go about doing their learning. And it's important for us as adults to understand that simply cajoling them into doing better, doing it faster, and so on, is not going to deliver those desired results. Doug, can you talk a bit about what are some things to think about when we're talking about rebuilding student agency?
Yeah, I think at a super basic level, we help students see the connection between their effort and the good things that happen. I think by and large, many students have a fractured relationship with learning. They need to rebuild this relationship with learning, that when I put forth effort, good things happen. That I see the connection between, oh, I studied, I practiced, I did the assignment my teacher asked me to do, and I see my learning. And oh, I can teach other people as a result of that, and I can share my learning. And I start to see that, wow, I have an influence in this. When I take on the task that my teacher asked me to do, when I focus, when I engage in deliberate practice, all these things are happening and I feel learning again. I feel like I've actually learned something. And so, yes, Module 3 explores the entire thing around teacher agency. And then we move into these conversations about what are the curricular areas. So in Module 4, we think about what's the curriculum? How do you know what students need to learn still? And yes, we have piles and piles of standards. What should we focus on for summer school? What's worth it for summer school? Following that, what's instruction going to look like? In the next module, we focus all about instruction. And then in the next module after that, about assessment. So if we start thinking about this, if we build student agency, we decide what they really need to learn this summer, and we have really good instructional tools, and we monitor progress through assessment, we actually could improve the quality of summer school. Now, none of that's very revolutionary. One of the things I would like to talk about is enrichment. We have to think about why lots of students would want to come to summer school. If we punish, if students perceive a punishment that they didn't do something during the school year, so they have to go to summer school, probably going to see some students disengaged and not want to be there and be frustrated, maybe act out a little bit. And maybe they haven't been physically in school for a while, or maybe they haven't been in physical school the way we're talking about for summer as we repopulate schools. But what if we focused on enrichment opportunities? Remember several years ago at the middle school, we started a writer's camp for summer, and we had so many kids come to writer's camp because they wanted to be there, not because of anything that happened during the school year. We created a summer camp around science. We created an integrated arts camp. And yes, of course, we infused reading and writing and academic language into all of those. But it was more like a week-long camp experience. And in the writer's camp, I remember students taking on different genres each week and going deep in that genre and reading and talking and then producing their own writing. And it was much more around personal narratives. And yes, during the year, we taught them about how to write an argument and how to write an explanation. But in summer and writing camp, we let them have all kinds of personal explorations. And as they did so, they still managed their grammar. They still had to think about the flow of ideas and the word choices. But that enrichment camp, where we invited lots and lots of students, not just students who experienced some sort of failure during the year. And in the enrichment camps, I noticed lots of peer-to-peer interactions, lots of language models, lots of language brokers, lots of energy there where it wasn't, Liz, I didn't do well. I'm in the, quote, slow class. I'm in the bad class. I'm in the class for kids who are being punished, and I'm resistant to this learning. And I know you were part of some of the integrated arts and the science camps.
And for integrated arts and for science, the direction that we really took in both of those was really capitalizing on the relevance of student learning. In other words, to make sure that those camps were set up very much with the idea in mind that students were going to be able to connect this to their own personal lives, to their interests, to the things that they wanted to be able to express. So in that integrated arts camp, for example, we started with students really thinking about a particular particular issue or topic that they found to be of great interest. And boy, we got lots of different arrangements and ideas from students because we opened that space up for them as well. And then we started introducing different kinds of multimedia in order to be able to carry your message. There were a number of students, for instance, who produced public service announcements around that topic of interest using multimedia tools. And as you noted earlier, these were so enriched with academic kinds of experiences because, boy, you had to use your math in order to be able to do this. You absolutely had to be able to write and communicate to do this. Capitalizing on students' relevance, and especially in setting forth what their goals would be, was really a key to success in both the science camp and the integrated arts camp.
As you were talking, I was remembering Salahuddin's, his project was about cars. Started off with a super simple question: how do cars work? And he ended up going back to the creation of cars, original cars, how cars have changed over time, and what he thinks could be future cars. And he said it's going to be way past the battery things that we're seeing today. But the amount of language and reasoning and vocabulary, it was so amazing because it started off with this question that he really wanted to know the answer to. So he read a lot. He talked to other people. He interviewed people. And yes, he learned about how cars work, but he learned so much more from that. And he didn't have to be there. That was the thing. He was enriched by being there. And his conversations with other students, I'm sure, enriched their experiences as well. Lately, we've been talking about these cognitive challenges to learning. And we've been really looking at this article on some of these cognitive challenges to learning. And it's pretty interesting when we think about what gets in the way, what confronts this. How do these cognitive challenges to learning produce barriers for students? And if we're thinking about summer and how to accelerate learning, make it enrichment, and recover any learning that students need to do, we probably need to spend some time on confronting these challenges to learning.
And confronting these challenges is so important for us as teachers to understand why it is that students disengage. It's unlikely that there's any young person out there that wakes up in the morning and says, I think I'm going to ruin her day today. And yet we have kids who disengage. And for us, it's that moment to remember to hit the pause button and to find out why it is that they're disengaging. And one of the reasons that they might disengage is because of their own mental mindset. In particular. And this goes right back to what it was that we were just talking about, that young person doesn't see that this content is relevant to them. Well, if that's the case, that's something that we are able to actually affect. Let's make sure that we're finding out what their interests are, making the deliberate and intentional steps to connect that to their relevant lives and how it is that they use that content.
That's what I really appreciate about these 9 cognitive challenges to learning, is all of them are out there for us to take action on. If we recognize these cognitive challenges to learning as we approach summer school, we actually could address each of these. The second one is around metacognition and self-regulation. And sometimes students are overconfident about what they understand and thus resistant to any kind of new learning. And if you are overconfident and you think about your thinking like, I already got this, I have totally learned it. And if you're overconfident and you're not receptive to learning, then you're not going to learn anything new. And the hard part about this is we don't want to destroy students because we want to maintain being strength spotters. But how do we get students to self-assess? And how do we get students to recognize the evidence that says, you know what, I still have some learning to do? I was thinking about things like formative practice testing, giving students a practice version of a test. We don't score it at all. What we ask them to do is analyze the practice test. to see what they understood and what they didn't understand. So in their own writing, in their own words, they're saying, oh, here are things I still need to practice, and here are things I could still learn.
Another one of those potential cognitive challenges is when a student has fear or mistrust about the schooling that's happening. In other words, that student, for whatever reason, is interpreting the teacher's behavior as being unfair or unsupportive in some way. This, I think, happens more often perhaps than we care to admit, where there is a bit of a breakdown in that trust. And this is at the individual level, and it calls for, in particular, like really focusing on teacher credibility and how it is that you rebuild trust for that student. It also can mean that you've got to restructure some of that feedback. Take a look at what that feedback feels like in terms of the student. Is there an opportunity there to be able to create feedback that is supportive, that it is humane, but it's also growth producing as well, not suggesting that we simply tell them they did a wonderful job when they didn't. But let's be sensitive about how it is that we're doing the feedback that we are offering to young people. And then finally, what we all need to be able to do is to ensure that we've got a climate that is in the classroom, that is in the school, that says, yes, mistakes are something that happens and they are a natural part of the learning process, and not something that anyone needs to feel any shame about at all. If you're not making mistakes, and you and I both say this to students all the time, if you're not making mistakes, you're not learning. That's a natural part of that.
And we make it safe for them to make those mistakes, that we really pay attention to the relationships, the growth producing, as you said, relationships we have with students. Another one, and I think this is going to come up a lot this summer, insufficient prior knowledge. They're at a disadvantage because of their prior knowledge compared to other students. They just don't have that background. Maybe it was an experience. Maybe it was things they didn't read. Maybe it was stuff from the previous school year. But if you don't have sufficient prior knowledge, it's really hard to make sense of the current learning. I think learning is a modification of what you already know. We go from the known to the new. And if you don't have a lot of the known, it's hard to go to the new. And so as we think through this, we should do some little prior knowledge checks. We should identify what is core prior knowledge that you have to have for this lesson to make sense. Because I believe we need to have lots of students experiencing lots of success this summer. What we don't want to do is have it be yet another failure for me. Now I feel more stupid, so I'm not going to come back the following year and be responsive to learning. Let's allow them to have some successes. Let's figure out what prior knowledge is critical, that it must be present for this lesson to work. And then let's work on developing that. And the cool thing is we didn't forget how to use some distance learning tools. We could make quick videos to build background knowledge, to build vocabulary that they can do asynchronously before the lesson. We didn't forget how to do that. We could also do a share session where people talk about things they already know about a topic and make lists. There's procedures to do this. But let's recognize that some students don't have sufficient prior knowledge for the lessons to work.
Misconceptions. Boy, that's another barrier that can get in the way. And science and math teachers in particular really understand how misconceptions can get in the way of new student learning. And I'll connect this back to the previous one around prior knowledge. Sometimes there are misconceptions that are held tightly by a student, and even when confronted with new information, they still end up hanging on to that. If you're a science teacher, if you're a math teacher in particular, it is really useful to know and understand what some of those common misconceptions are about the content that you'll be teaching, so that you can teach directly toward those as well. Another opportunity to do so is to be able to do, as you noted earlier, do a practice test and have students at the beginning of a unit of instruction, for example, identify which statements are true and which statements are false so that you can specifically call them out and then be able to say, we're going to learn about why it is that these statements are false and these statements are true. With misconceptions, you need to take them head on and really explain to students when misconceptions exist so that you can teach new information.
And then some students have ineffective learning strategies. And sometimes they prefer strategies that are less effective than other strategies because they just don't know any better. This summer is an opportunity to teach students how to learn. Let's spend our energy providing students a range of learning strategies and then options for them to learn to choose strategies that work. There's not just one way to solve this. There's not just one way to write this. There's not one way to think about this. There are probably incorrect ways, but there are many possible ways. And if we could spend some time teaching students how to learn and a little less worry about all the perceived gaps, because if we teach them how to learn and they start that learning journey, recognizing their learning, they're going to be way better off for the years to come. I'm not suggesting we don't teach them any content this summer. They do need content. We address their background knowledge. But why not be explicit with the learning strategies that work? What is a good study skill, for example? How do you make sense of a text? How do you make predictions about what you're reading? How do you estimate answers? Whatever it is, let's provide them some learning strategies integrated into the content that they're learning.
Transfer of knowledge, transfer of learning. Most would say this is really what it is that we are going for. We're not just teaching content, teaching facts, and so on. We really are teaching toward their ability to be able to apply that information in new and novel kinds of ways. But there are times for a student where they just can't apply that knowledge. I'm thinking about writing, Doug, in particular. They may understand at some level about grammar and syntax and using transitions and those sorts of things, but they can't actually make it happen in their own writing. This is really often a task design dilemma. It's very important that when we're teaching new information, that we're also building in those opportunities for students to apply that information immediately, to give those opportunities to be able to utilize that. So for example, in teaching writing around transitions, and we've got that list of transitions that are there, let's pivot immediately and try out a couple of those transitions inside of 1 or 2 paragraphs, inside of a short bit of learning, so that we're always building students toward their ability to be able to apply that knowledge in lots of different ways. And even when the teacher isn't standing right there saying, this is when you should do this.
And there are constraints in selective attention. And we tend to believe that we can multitask. It's the myth of multitasking. And people will say, well, I can walk and chew gum at the same time. Yes, you can engage in multiple motor behaviors, but your cognitive focus is on one thing. And we have to figure out, this summer especially, how to work on attention, how to get students to focus. And some students lived in places and were learning in places that were highly distracting for them. And so our job now is, how can we refocus attention? How can we have students self-regulate, where they learn how to consciously make a choice to return their mind back to the learning task? Because we can teach self-regulation. We can teach cognitive regulation. We can teach students, I'm noticing that my mind is wandering. I'm starting to think about Fortnite or whatever. So now I need to come back. Because one of the barriers to learning is this selective attention. You're not paying attention to all the things that you really need to pay attention to learn. And I think these 9, we have one more to go, but I think these 9 serve as a really nice inventory for, as we think about summer, Can we spend time confronting these challenges to learning? Can we rebuild some habits for students? Can we be on the lookout for these 9 and figure out what to do? It also could be a great learning opportunity for us to practice looking for these cognitive challenges to learning in the summer, so we're even more ready to start the next school year.
And this last one, certainly there are times when students are just at their limit around their working memory or their mental effort. And when this happens, it's often because the task is too complex for them, and then it needs to be broken down, or they are ineffectively trying to remember too much information. So let's take the latter of the two, remembering too much information. Make sure that students know how it is to chunk information, how it is to be able to associate ideas with one another. In other words, they need opportunities to be able to consolidate, to be able to see how ideas, concepts, skills relate to one another. And that first one, sometimes the task is too complex. How do we help that student break down a complex task into more bite-sized kinds of pieces? This especially, I think this is one where we see students visibly give up. They give up, they quit. I can't do this. It's too hard. It's too much. And they move away from it. Let's bring them back, give them time to consolidate the information, give them opportunities to be able to break down that complex task into bite-sized pieces. And sometimes that means that we're sitting right alongside of them and we're assisting them in doing that. We're not giving them the answers, but rather we're saying what might be the first step to be able to approach this particular problem.
And as you were talking about that, I kept thinking about the beginning part of our conversation. These 9 are going to impact the student's agency. All of them have a potential to either foster or have a barrier to the student's agency and their belief in their effort and the connection to the outcomes. And they also have an opportunity for enrichment. If we build enrichment opportunities and we start noticing these cognitive challenges to learning, and we really are aware this is what students need to learn right now. We have good assessment information. We have really good understanding of the curriculum standards. We have really good instructional approaches. We actually could up the effect of summer school. Because remember, the effect sizes are from the past. They are based on research in the past. This is now. We have this summer and probably next summer to focus on any unrealized learning that students had. We also have the potential to stretch and recognize all of the gifts and strengths that students come to this summer. There are unprecedented ways that students interact on technology. There are all kinds of learning that students have done, problem solving, how to get in their video conferences. I mean, just the things they've learned that we want to honor. My last comment, my last thought about this in our time together today is around students' confidence. And we've done a fair amount of work lately on how to build or rebuild students' confidence. So all the way back to the connection to the idea of student agency. If I don't think I can learn it, I'm probably going to look for confirming evidence that I don't, that I struggle. And so as we think about students' confidence, we can set goals together. That helps build our confidence, especially in the language that adults use. We can do this. We can learn this. We can read about this. Encouraging self-assessment, we talked about that already in this webinar, and peer assessment. Giving useful feedback, you've already talked about. Look at the next one. Empty their heads. Students often believe they are struggling more than they are. They have this internalized dialogue that they are struggling significantly. And every once in a while, we need to learn to unpack their heads and show them how much they've accomplished. Be a strength spotter. Recognize that students have learned things. Celebrate that and show them that effort is normal. It's normal to have to strive for things. It's normal to struggle through some things, and it feels pretty awesome on the other side. And as you do that, as you realize you're not struggling as much as you think you are, and you realize that struggle is part of the process, and as you said earlier, Nancy, making errors is part of the learning process, all that cycles back to Module 3, student agency, and recognizing their efforts will result in great things so that we can celebrate everyone and build their confidence. So I think summer school is possible. I think summer school has potential, but I think we can't do summer like we've done summer in the past. Let's not force some kids who we perceive to be failing into a remedial program for summer. Let's make it enrichment. Let's make it exciting. Let's be aware of the cognitive challenges and the reality that many students, some students, have lost their relationship with learning, and we need to build their agency. That part of our role is to build the confidence of learning while we build their competence of learning.